College is a wild ride for young adults, and their mental health often suffers. This podcast addresses the inner battles many college students struggle with. You're listening to Normalize It Forward, where we have raw, unfiltered conversations about young people's biggest mental health problems, how to handle them, and how to achieve a more resilient mind. Time to get rid of those heavy burdens and focus more on self-love and care. Here is your host, Mark Lehman.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Normalize It Forward, the podcast that openly talks about mental health and wellness. Today, I'm super excited to welcome in Dr. Laura Saunders. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Mark.
She is a staff psychologist working at the Institute of Living here in Hartford, at Hartford Hospital. She's a director of the new initiative, the Center for Gender Health at Hartford Healthcare. Dr. Saunders in 2015 was named the Employee of the Year by Hartford Hospital. In 2019, Dr. Saunders was the recipient of the Ned Graffignino Award for Distinguished Service in the area of community-oriented work and collaboration with other mental health professionals. Her areas of expertise include LGBTQ mental health, child psychopathology, behavioral management, parent training, and family therapy. Laura also appears regularly on local TV news to provide psychological commentary on various topics relevant to youth and family, and currently has two segments called Check-In on WFSB Channel 3, the Great Day Connecticut show related to child and family health. Dr. Saunders, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm super excited to speak with you today. And, obviously the topic of mental health and wellness is certainly near and dear to both of us with the work that we do. Would love to start off, if it's okay, with just talking with you about what it is that you do specifically at the Institute of Living and just telling us a bit about your program.
Sure. So I want to give a little background because I think that helps give it a little bit more context, right? So the early part of my career, I spent about 18 years on a child and adolescent inpatient unit here at the Institute of Living. So working with both children and adolescents with, moderate to severe psychopathology. And that's really where I got my kind of core understanding of trauma and complex trauma and really how waves of issues affect our young people. From there, I started a program at the Institute of Living, an intensive outpatient program, specifically for LGBTQ youth and young adults, because that was sort of a sideline expertise that I'd had for a long time. And then they tapped me to start this program because in the Division of Young Adult Services here, they're really working on creating specialty tracks to meet more specific needs. And from there, I really saw the need for trans and gender diverse folks to support them in their medical transition. And because in the beginning, I was making all referrals for medical transition outside the Hartford Hospital and Hartford Healthcare system. And I said, this doesn't make any sense to me. We're, a large hospital system. Why am I making all these referrals outside of the hospital? And from that point, I began the work. I did actually some leadership training and got to know the system a lot better and began the work of developing this new initiative at Hartford Healthcare. So we call it the Center for Gender Health. And it's really, to support individuals, trans and gender diverse individuals, teens, young adults, and adults in their stepping into their medical transition. We offer a multidisciplinary clinic that has primary care, endocrinology, psychiatry, and psychology. And we make referrals for plastic surgery, for urology, for GYN care, for voice therapy, for rehab. So we really do a lot of work in supporting our young people.
Just amazing work. Being a local clinician in the area, Laura, I have to say, I consider myself really lucky to have access to a program like that. I see you as a pioneer in that field, really creating this program and recognizing the need. And, I'm sure many young people that have come through have benefited tremendously. And, it's amazing. I mean, in our careers, you and I have been doing this for quite some time. In our careers, things have changed a bunch, And I think certainly on a real general level, both you and I have seen anxiety and depression go up tremendously in the last, say, 5 to 10 years. I guess I'm curious, I'll ask you a really big question, but I guess I'm curious, what goes into that? What do you think are some of the factors that have led to such an increase?
So I'm actually a big podcast listener. So I love to listen to podcasts from all different kinds of people. And there was a podcast that I listened to a while back that really talked about the change in the trajectory of parenting and mental health. And it actually started in the actually in the 90s with this concept of stranger danger, right? And there was like,
I remember
movies,
stranger danger.
right?
Yeah.
Movies
Yeah.
about it. And it actually created this phenomenon where parents became hyper vigilant about their children. Like, so, when I grew up, certainly probably when you grew up too, I mean, I would, in the summer on the weekends, I would leave the house in the morning and go out
Right.
and venture through the neighborhood and find people to play with or play semi-organized games of kickball or softball or, whatever else we wanted to do.
Yep.
And I had a tremendous amount of freedom as a young person. Now, that also meant that not so much for me, more my brothers made a lot of dumb mistakes, but that's how you learned, right? You learned
Absolutely.
on a lot of that. And I wasn't necessarily coming back and reporting to my parents all the things that I did, nor did they ask. But this concept of stranger danger kind of changed that trajectory. And it made parents believe, and I think falsely believe, that the world's a dangerous place. Now, I'm also taking into account here that not a week goes by where we don't hear about a school shooting or other kinds of things, right? And those are some bigger contextual social issues that I think are not being well addressed, but that's probably not for this podcast. But it really, that's where this whole concept of the play date came out of, right? So I'm not just going to let my child roam free. I want them, I want to arrange a date for them where they, someone comes to our house or my child goes to their house and they play for sort of a prescribed period of time. And it changed the worldview for a lot of people. And in that, I think it really created a lot of restrictions and also deficits in socialization. I do a lot of work, certainly with trans youth, but even in my private practice and the segments I do on Channel 3 WFSB really just talks about general child mental health. And I have seen it really change drastically in the last 10 to 15 years. And it honestly got, and I'm sure you saw this as well, significantly worse during COVID.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, you make a great point. I hadn't quite thought of it in that context. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And yeah, there's been, I think from our parents' generation to our generation of parenting, there's been a real different perspective on things. And, that has certainly translated and sort of been handed down to the generation of youth today who oftentimes don't experience things nearly the same as we did when we were kids, right? So when they're experiencing anxieties, they're highly sensitive. So many young people haven't had, their first, real stressor sometimes, until their senior year of high school when they don't get into the right college, And for me, having done this, for many, many years, I'm continued to be, I guess, surprised by that because, to me, it feels really late, feels really late to be experiencing that type of stuff. But certainly, as you mentioned, COVID had a huge impact on all of this. And certainly as we're looking through our high schools and our colleges these days, there are so many kids out there with major stressors. And some kids have diagnosed anxiety and depression. Some kids do not. But the majority of the kids are feeling it. They're definitely feeling that, that level of stress. And I guess I'm wondering, Laura, in your work with young people nowadays, what are some of the things that young people can do to combat those types of stressors?
So I think it's twofold. I think, and when you were talking, when you said, sometimes they're not hitting some of their major challenges to senior year in high school, right? And I think to myself, well, why is that? Well, it's this, it's the concept of what they call the helicopter parent or the lawnmower parent, right? So because of a lot of these, fears, and I think there's generational backlashes, but many parents prevent bad things from happening for their children. And I'm not talking about safety issues, right? Safety issues need to be addressed always. But I'm talking about a lot of the little failures, that happen, like getting cut from a team or having some negative peer interactions. I'm not talking about bullying. I'm just talking about regular, typical, everyday conflict between kids that they just need to sort out on their own. I mean, again, if it reaches a safety level, that's a different standard.
But you're saying experience, like have the experience, get through it.
Yeah. I mean, you have to experience those disappointments and those failures because that's where a lot of the learning takes place.
Right.
So if we do too much to shelter our young people until they start to get their college rejections. And actually, I know that you have, because this is the work that you're doing, but I hear anecdotally about so many young people going off to college and really having significant adjustment issues. Now, I think first year of college for kids that go away to school, or even kids that commute to school, is one of the hugest adjustment periods in early development.
Agreed. Yeah.
But I think they're having worse problems because they just don't know how to manage some of the stressors. And one of the big things also has to do with this huge surge in young people diagnosing themselves with social anxiety, and then believing that the cure for social anxiety is to stay at home or just do online things or just do video games, right? So that is not how you manage social anxiety. Now, I'm not saying, throw your young person into a den of people and make them talk to every single person, but it's the social isolation that happens in this world that we're in, where so many friendships are online, or so much of their free time is through video games, that they just don't learn the skills of social interaction, right? Social isolation is gasoline on the fire of depression. And we really need to look out for how we can better challenge our young people to have more of those skills, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to, deal with the challenges of life.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's funny. I found myself saying a lot with young people in school, when we were learning, math, for example, learn how to do math, right? I mean, part of the learning process is making mistakes, and eventually you master it. And then you move on to whatever the next complex, math would be. But for some reason, there's been this detour socially with young people. And I agree with you. I think that the concept of isolation has been just horrible for so many kids. I think that if I could twist some of what you said into this concept of what can parents do, I think what I'm hearing you say is what parents can do is sort of force kids to be more out there, and to be, to be, whether it be hanging out with other kids, joining clubs or activities, trying to figure out what they enjoy and what they don't. As they get a little bit older, maybe getting a part-time job, which I don't see kids doing nearly as much nowadays, but sort of pushing them, because those are experiences, dealing with a tough customer, right? Those are experiences that teach them things, and to be able to become resilient and come back from that, so that they're not thrown completely off, base when they're dealing with stuff like that. I think the suggestion is really, really a helpful one. And I really want parents in my audience to pay attention, because I think that it's this type of stuff starts at home. It starts with parents saying, okay, what can we do? Devices, whether it be phones or iPads or computers, they don't teach kids a ton of things. Certainly they don't teach kids about interaction and socialization. And I think that more parents should be pushing their kids to be out there and to be involved in activities.
Right. And I think what social media has done for a lot of young people is it's created this comparison culture, right? And I have all these little phrases, right? Comparison is the thief of joy. The more we spend time comparing ourselves, even as an adult, right? If I see that someone had this fantastic weekend and they get along great with everyone and they do all these fun things, and then here I am, I was at home, and I just cleaned all weekend, that kind of comparison, as a general rule, just makes us feel bad about ourselves.
Of course.
And for young people, right, what they see through, all these social media apps like Snapchat, right? You look on Snap Maps and you realize that 3 of your friends are in the same place and you weren't invited.
Right.
And so now that creates this sense of like, what is wrong with me? Why don't people like me? I mean, and you know what? Sometimes you just can't invite everyone, right? You have to manage those things. Sometimes we as adults, we don't get invited to every dinner party and gathering. We have to learn to manage those things. And so I recognize, I say all the time, parenting's the hardest job. And honestly, parenting young people in this day and age, I think is particularly hard. It has different challenges than it did 10, 15, 20, certainly
No
10
doubt.
years ago.
No doubt.
And it is the hardest job. And so the more we point out and identify strategies to help parents step back a little bit and challenge their kids. I'm a huge proponent of getting a part-time job. Once you're 16 years old, you get a part-time job. Not only is it a little bit of money in your pocket, which equals independence, it is also dealing with people and life challenges.
Right.
You know, and we're not talking about high-level jobs. We're talking about working at the local grocery store, working, doing something that gets you out of the house and creates challenges for you to have to manage.
I'm so glad you said that, Laura. I mean, you made two really important points I just want to touch on. One is parents pulling back, which is so hard for some parents, right? I mean, but necessary. If you've got a kid who's college bound, right? And they're a sophomore or a junior and they're kind of like growing and you're still doing way too much for them. You have to, as a parent, question, how are they possibly going to be ready to leave your house in a year and a half? Because I see some parents just keep doing that. And then their kid graduates and they're just like, they think magically, their kid's going to learn how to do these things. And it is a real struggle. I think parentally, I think that it is more of a struggle for a kid who has a parent doing everything for them when they go to college than vice versa, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, this is not meant to criticize. I think parents act on with the best of intentions.
Absolutely.
And maybe as sort of a sociological study, I was so my generation of kids growing up, we were so independent. We want to maybe lessen some of the challenges and burdens for our kids. So I think it's coming from a good place. But those challenges and those burdens are really where all the learning takes place. And I do worry a lot about young people, and because I do think it's harder. I do think this is where social media has made life a lot harder, and there's different challenges. But as you said, it's doing something outside of your comfort zone. It doesn't have, if you're not into sports, I mean, I love sports for young people, but if you're not into sports, join a painting class or the chess club or the robotics team or the Italian club or the Spanish. Do something that's outside your comfort zone a little bit and makes you interact with people that you wouldn't typically interact with, doing things that are outside your comfort zone, and for parents to really actively encourage that.
Yeah, and if you're a parent out there and you have a kid who just says no, no, no at every turn, continue to come up with and brainstorm ideas. Because like you said, Laura, there will be something out there that they have a little interest in, and then you give them a little bit of a push to say, hey, go to this painting class, see what you think. Go to this photography class, see what you think. And I've seen it before hundreds of times over the years where kids will do those things and all of a sudden they find something that they're really passionate about. And even better, kids there that they connect with, which is awesome. Right. You mentioned social media a few times, and I just wanted to touch on that because I feel like that is, probably at least a 10-hour conversation we could have about how it's affecting kids. One gentleman I interviewed last month, Laura, was talking about the impact on Instagram and how that seems to really affect females in particular and creates this, this culture of comparison and this culture of needing to look a certain way and needing to act a certain way. And that whole conversation around likes and follows and all of that and how that impacts self-worth. I mean, it's a huge topic, but want to just talk to you for a few minutes about social media and any suggestions that maybe as a parent and a clinician, you might have for parents around management of social media.
Well, I think it starts with, as much as possible, delaying when kids get smartphones, because once they have a smartphone that it connects to the Wi-Fi and the internet, they can have access to most things. And let's face it, young people are smarter about technology than their parents. And so they can get around, even if you put all sorts of parental controls on, they get around things, and they do it in such a way that you're like, how the heck did you get that? I thought I brought, there's a lot of movements out there, and into waiting till, I think it's wait until 8th grade is one of them. They have different websites, not letting your children get smartphones until they're, 8th grade's what, 13?
Yeah,
13
about
years
13.
old. Not the 13-year-old brain's a well-thinking brain, but at least it's better than someone getting at age 10.
Right.
So waiting as long as you can. And also really trying to have some open dialogue about the things that they're seeing. So I worked with someone one time, was a 13-year-old, and they did have a phone, and they desperately wanted Snapchat. And so the mom would block them, and then they would find a way around it, and they would, get on it, and then they'd lose their phone for a period of time, and then they'd be upset, because the reality is that is the way young people communicate with each other.
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
not, it's not even, they don't do what I did, which was, we had one phone with a long extension cord in the kitchen. So if I wanted to talk to my friend in high school, I had to sit on that in the dining room with a long cord and just talk in the dining room. But that, talking on the phone was the way that we communicated, but the way young people communicate is through social media. So then she would take her phone away for a protracted period of time, and then she'd have no way to contact friends, and then she'd become more angry and irritable. And so it was this cycle. And I said, how can we manage this differently, right? So if she wants this app, you're on it with her, right? And you're monitoring it. So instead of banning things, because then they circumvent around it, you're on it too. And so anything that she sends has to be sent to you also. And so finding more creative ways to manage things, because putting a ban on something often just means they're going to sneak and get it anyway.
Right.
So finding more creative ways as parents to delay or to monitor or to create open dialogues really is the better way to deal with all of this.
I like that, Laura. I like that a lot. I think, we need to sort of get to that acceptance place. The kids just have that, that mode of thought around technology, and sort of will always be ahead of us on some of that. And I think, having, to me, one of the best things I've heard so far since I've started this podcast is I had a mom reach out to me, and she said, we listened to one of your shows, me and my 15-year-old together, and it created an open conversation around mental health. And I thought, how awesome. That's kind of why I created this. I want people to have these open conversations. And, part of that is social media, and really getting kids to understand, as much as it does have its positive components, there's a downside to it. And, there's a reason why the Surgeon General put out their warning about it and its impact on young people and their mental health. So I appreciate your suggestion. I think it's a good middle of the road. It's a good way for parents to sort of create, okay, we can have this, but we need to have it in a safe fashion in the house. Kind of along those lines, Laura, I guess I'm wondering, one of the things that I often ask with people that come on is for them to nominate a friend, a coworker, or a relative, just to keep the conversation going. You've been so kind with your time and energy today and suggestions. Any thoughts in terms of who you'd like to nominate for one of our future shows?
So I'd like to nominate a colleague of mine, Dr. David Bendor. He's a psychologist here at the Institute of Living, and he actually runs our medical track in young adult services. And so that is the combination of young people who have medical issues. It could be diabetes, it could be Crohn's disease, it could be any number of different things, and then have co-occurring mental health issues, and really look at the way that kind of medical and psychological issues blend. The reality is a lot of young people don't have the words necessary to express how they feel. And so it isn't pretty common that somatic complaints are the way that young people express how they feel. And so really understanding the interplay between medical issues and psychological issues, I think, is critical.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I know Dr. Bendor really well, and I appreciate that nomination. David, you're up next. And, two pioneers in the field. If IOL doesn't know it yet, they should. Laura, with yourself and certainly David Bendor. So I appreciate you nominating him, and just want to thank you for your time, your energy. I know you're super busy. Your thoughts on these topics and subjects are so helpful. So thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day, Laura.
Thank you.
Take care.
That's all for this episode of Normalize It Forward. May this conversation serve as a reminder that you are never alone in facing your mental health struggles. There are always people who can help. To dive even deeper into our journey of normalizing one of the biggest issues young people face, check out more episodes of the show at youareheard.com. It's UAREHEARD.com. Continue gaining access to the right tools, the best resources, and the most insightful advice to achieve positivity, mindfulness, and genuine happiness.